Okay, hello everyone. We're going to give it a second for the Zoom to trickle everyone in. Hi everyone. I hope you're all doing well on this Saturday afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for our live from the studio with Rolande Souliere. My name is Bahar Mahazabnia, and I'm the Assistant Curator of Engagement here at Griffin Art Projects. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that our work takes place on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish nations, to whom we are deeply grateful. I would also like to thank the BC Arts Council, North Vancouver Recreation and Culture, and the Frybe Foundation for their generous support of Griffin's residency programs. Lastly, I'll mention that at the end of today's presentation, there will be a chance for an audience Q&A. So if you have a question for Roland, please feel free to type that into the Q&A dialog box, and we'll come to it at the end of Roland's talk. You can also choose to raise your hand if you're brave and ask your question out loud. So we'll hear your voice, but we won't see you. But if you do choose to speak out loud, just please note that this event is being recorded and your voice will also be recorded. So without further ado, I'll introduce Roland. Working across installation, socially engaged art, and contemporary and permanent public art, Souliere's art practice explores the interconnectedness and complexities involved in systems, whether social, political, or cultural. Souliere is interested in how these systems have impacted Indigenous peoples in personal and collective histories. Souliere was born and raised on Turtle Island, North America, and lives and works on Gadigal Island in Sydney, Australia. She is a member of the Michi-Poken First Nation and has a PhD and MMA from Sydney College of Arts, Sydney University. And without any more further ado, Roland, I'll pass it off to you.
Thank you, Bahar, for that lovely introduction. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, which we stand upon, the unceded territories of the Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Today, I'm going to talk about my project here at Griffin Art Projects in North Vancouver. I've been here for 2 months. So what I'm going to do first is give you a little quick tour just for you to imagine me working away here. So I'm just going to walk around slowly. So I'll just start from the front so you can see what I do every day. I walk up these stairs and then I come into these beautiful spaces. So I'm going to just turn around now. So here is my studio. I'm sure you're not interested in seeing the bathroom, so I won't show it to you. So here is one of the studios where my mentee, Cody, told me will be hanging out, but right now he's letting me put my paintings here. So I'm kind of being a hog and occupying both spaces. So there's one wall. And then here's my main space. So we have 3 walls, and then I've occupied all of these walls with large scale paintings, which are 64 inches high by 8 feet long. And then here is my lovely kitchen where I do all my cooking and eating and drinking. Yeah. So that's my space. You can kind of get an idea of what I've been doing, what I've been working, but I'll show you some more images soon. So to put things into context, I'm gonna show you some images of Anishinaabe cosmology. So I'm Anishinaabe from Mishmakaten First Nation. And just kind of, I'm sure most people aren't familiar with the traditional images that are associated with Anishinaabe cosmology. So I'm going to share my screen and open up a PowerPoint. Here we go. Just slideshow. Okay, so the project that I've been working on is mainly focused around Anishinaabe cosmologies. This is something that is a thread that continues through to my practice. As a child, I was totally fascinated by the First Nation legends. I learned from elders at the Children's Native program I attended in Toronto, Canada. I attended this program from 6 years old till I was about maybe 15. It was a very memorable experience, and a lot of my art practice draws upon that experience as a child. So I carry that through. Everything that I learned there, whether through making traditional regalia, dancing, listening to the legends or the mythology. And when I started my art practice, I started to incorporate that into my work. So here we have like aspects of the sky world. So it's an earlier work from 2005, but I just wanted to show that, you know, it's something that is a continuous thread, and that I was always thinking about what these majestic creatures would look like in the world. So the sky world is above, and then we have the lower realm, which is underwater worlds. And I always thought, you know, what would these creatures look like who live in the sky world? How many are them? How many different types are they? What special powers do they have? So in traditional Anishinaabe cosmology, humans only inhabit the middle slice of a many-layered world, and all other layers are filled with powerful, majestic beings that reside either in the sky or below in the waters. So I'm totally fascinated with the thunderbirds. So part of my project here at Griffin relates to that, but I wanted to show like all the different types of work I made regarding the thunderbirds. I was particularly taken by them, and there's many legends around the thunderbirds. Too many to tell right now. I would be here all afternoon, but I do appreciate your time today in visiting me on Zoom. So the thunderbirds are majestic and powerful spirits who reside in the sky world. The thunderbirds are seen as being responsible for the thunderstorms we witness, as the thunderers create lightning, thunder, and rain. The thunder we hear is the flapping of the almighty bird's wings, and the lightning is the flashing of their brightly lit eyes. It is said among the Anishinaabe that these fantastical birds have been seen in some parts of Ontario and Canada, Alberta. The thunderous sound we hear, as I said, is the flapping of their wings, and traditional Anishinaabe people would, whenever there's a thunderstorm, would cover like any shiny object so as not to attract the thunderers. I know this from personal experience because when I was a child, my mother used to make me run around and cover all the shiny objects and mirrors in the house with towels or blankets whenever a thunderstorm occurred. And, you know, I would always think to myself, oh, wonder what those thunderers are doing, you know? So in this particular work here, the intense and various degrees of light that is illuminated from the numerous headlights can be seen as portraying the area where the atmospheric electricity generated between the sky and the earth is created when lightning strikes. To me, the mirror attributes of the headlights provoke a majestic presence that spiritual beings are present. Did you know that there are two types of thunderbirds? There's the young and the old. Young thunderbirds are often associated with being naughty because by nature, their immaturity often leads to unpredictable and volatile tendencies, such as randomly firing thunderbolts into the air. So whenever you look into the sky and you see these random lightning bolts, you know that those are the young Benisiwags, you know, playing around. The intensity and vibrancy of the red light can be representative of their evilness. The installation is titled Young Benisiwags, and in Anishinaabe Moan, it means thunderbirds. I've created, many types of installations with these thunderbirds, ranging from the uncanny to like humorous, like popular culture. So in this particular image, I have like tiny little thunderbirds. I don't know if you can see them right here. And I call them thunderbirds in the cloud because to me, they're mischievous little creatures that just, are playing around and or swearing or, doing naughty things. So in traditional Anishinaabe culture, we see these thunderbirds. There's images on fiber bags, on regalia, all different types of objects where you will see these thunderbirds. I'm quite interested in how they are portrayed. I think they're really beautiful objects in themselves, but the imagery to me is quite fascinating. So here, if we see these two little guys here, those are the baby thunderbirds, and then that's the mama thunderbird. Let's see. So thunderbirds, like they can be represented in different states that range from representational figures, as we just saw earlier, to pure abstraction. So this is an abstract version of the thunderbirds with geometric forms such as zigzags, diamonds, hexagons, and I guess like scalloping on the side. Up at the top there, all these 4 little triangles represent how that thunderbirds are waiting to eat their prey. So they're standing and looking down. So, so as I said, like a great number of these objects, from birch bark scrolls to fiber bags to clothing, bear such motifs that exist in many collections from the mid to 19th, 20th century. I get a lot of my inspiration by looking at these traditional objects, but of course online, sometimes I do get to see them in the real, which is very special. So for the Griffin projects, I wanted to continue with the Thunderbird framework, but this time I wanted to include the Thunderbird's nemesis, and that's the underwater panther. So I was interested in visually portraying the feisty interaction between these two in their various states of abstraction. So in Anishinaabe mythology, we see these two spiritual beings as rivals. So they're always fighting. There's always like some kind of clashing between these two spiritual beings. And I wanted to draw upon that using traditional motives of those two majestic beings, the thunderbird and the underwater panther, through abstraction, through painting. So the thunderbird and the underwater panther are polar opposites. They each have their distinct characters. They have interrelated oral traditions with specific visual signs. The thunderbird bears a swirling doorway to the underworld, and the panther bears an aspect of the thunderbird. So that's why they're interrelated. They can, go between the two worlds if they choose to. Both other than human beings can change form, including human forms, and oral legends tell of humans marrying them in their changed state. So here I, imagine that they are like creatures, half human, half animal. And so I've created this kind of funny little painting that's a digital print to try to capture that, uncanny, cheeky aspect of these creatures. So with the underwater panther, it's a powerful mythical being, and they're seen as like great lynx or as great giant cats with serpent tails and big horns. As such, they are half feline, half serpent. Underwater panthers rule the subsurface realm of lakes, rivers, swamps, cosmos, and they have some fluidity between the upper and underwater world. That's because of their transformation process. Interesting, the underwater panther's home is Mishmakaten Island. So Mishmakaten, as I said earlier, is my nation, and that's my reserve. So I find it quite funny that being like fascinated with thunderbirds, like the enemy is living right on my reserve in Mishpachot, you know. So to me, I found that quite amusing when I was looking at my research. So here we have in the red, in the circle here, these little pink spikes are representative of the underwater panther's powers. So that's their tail, where they swash it around and like can knock you out or knock out the thunderbird. And there's also the underwater panther has this particular sign on traditional objects. It's, you know, I guess it's called like a whirlpool or an octagon. And this shows that the underwater panther is either going to emerge or is present. So if you look at the water, that will, you know, send a signal to the thunderbird that the underwater panther may surface. So these are little clues that these two rivals can, you know, look at and identify and, you know, prepare to battle. So to me, it's kind of, you know, the abstract pattern of the octagon that represents the underwater panther is also like optical art in Western contemporary art. So I find that, you know, that quite fascinating. But in traditional Anishinaabe mythology, it does mean something based on those symbols. So in this sense, the underwater panther is represented by the octagon, and it indicates its tracks or the eddy it creates when surfacing or diving. By knowing the swirling, one can recognize the underwater panther is present. It is said this swirling water is a door to the underworld, but it also is a warning to beware. Something is there, something is going to happen. So it doesn't necessarily mean, though, that the underwater panther is going to be present. It's kind of just a signal. So here's a close-up of the octagon in my paintings. The thunderbirds, and here's another close-up of the underwater panther. So in this work, I'm trying to portray visually the interaction between those two rivals. So here we have the dominant underwater panther symbol, but also there's also abstract motives that relate to the thunderbird. So let's see what we have here. So the thunderbird, on the other hand, is represented differently. So it's usually represented by this X here, or this hourglass figure that is somewhat abstracted. So that represents traditionally the thunderbird. This is usually the chest of the thunderbird, and it's usually very angular. So it's usually represented by zigzags, triangles, you know, those represent the body or the feet or baby thunderbirds. But one thing I forgot to mention is that the underwater panther with this crisscrossing is also its power at night. So when you see the crisscrossing, that is representative of the underwater panther as well. And that's his special powers that he uses at night. During the day, the underwater panther doesn't have any cross-hatching on its body. Whereas the thunderbird, this, if you looks kind of like an abstracted G sign here. There's many types of thunderbirds. And when you see the G sign, that represents the either G thunderbird and also represents the heart of the thunderbird. So when you're looking at traditional objects in any collection, and if you see that G, just think of this one. So that's a G thunderbird. So the thunderbird's power are, as you probably guessed it, lightning. So here, you know, there's a focus on the lightning bolts. And of course, they have claws and everything, but you know, this is their most powerful symbol. So here we have, you know, the works that I've created depicting the battle between these two rivalries. And so at the end, at the top and the bottom, we can see the underwater panther is nighttime powers. And then in the purple circle, that's a thunderbolt. So that can represent the thunderbird on both aspects, as well as on this yellow circle. So I wonder who's winning the battle in this image. Is it the Thunderbird who's winning the battle, or is it the underwater panther? So here the movement in the paintings are, is what I'm trying to represent: the clash, the fighting, the long-term rivalry between these two majestic beings. I don't know what happened, but it goes way, way back. Maybe, I think from memory, the underwater panther killed one of the Thunderbird's brother. And so that's left this, these two people fighting, these two majestic beings fighting from here on in. So I wanted to play with this clashing of these two majestic beings through abstraction. So in this image, we have both symbols merging. So we have the underwater panther through the octagon. We show the powers between the two majestic beings. And then, of course, we see the body of the Thunderbird. So who do you think is winning this battle in this painting? It's another close-up. And yeah, so that's what my project was about, creating these paintings of the Anishinaabe mythology. I'm gonna stop share right here. And yeah, I'm open for questions.
Great, thank you, Roland. I think I'll start by asking the first question while we give everyone some time to type away in the chat. I found it very interesting that to have this binary between enemies, sort of rooted in this abstraction that's coming from these Anishinaabe cosmologies, and you mentioned op art, and we view it as so similar to that, but it's in fact its very own thing with a very different history. So that's just something that I found fascinating. And there's something I want to ask that wasn't you touched upon, but you didn't really delve into, and that's the sort of because we see these as paintings and they're inside, but I'm wondering if this is the same kind of approach and methodology you use when you're creating the public works and public sculptures and works of outdoor art that you create, and if there's kind of a different method that you use, because it's so different to have this interior versus exterior work. So I'm wondering if that's something that you could speak to.
I guess with the public art, it's a totally different approach because it's more site specific. So I was look at, the site and look at the history around the site, or do a little bit of research and then create these large scale works. Normally, I paint to relax. I hardly, I'm mainly installation artist. So I normally make, eventually these will turn into an installation, but I decided to do paintings instead. Because normally I would paint directly on the wall. But now I've changed my approach and thought, well, just make them into paintings because then they can live longer. Whereas previously at site-specific installations, they get painted over.
Great. Yes, thank you for that. It is, yeah, they're totally different mediums and different contexts. So it's just interesting because some people have that same sort of rigid approach that they have across the board for their practice. So it's just insightful to hear that. So we have a question from Sheila Kanu. And they say, thank you, Roland. Can you tell us how you came to live in Australia? What are the connections between your Indigenous culture and art and that of the Australian Indigenous culture and art?
Oh, okay. I guess the first part of the question, I met my then husband in Toronto, Canada, and he's Australian. So that he asked me to marry him in the middle of winter. So of course, if eventually I'd like to move to Australia. So of course I said yes, because it's freezing to death. So that's how I came to live in Sydney. I started my art career there in Sydney. I wasn't an artist when I was in Canada. I used to be a computer programmer. So quite a drastic change, but I wanted to have children. So, my mom suggested that I go and go to art school. So with the second part of the question, answering the Indigenous culture, yes, I do feel there's connection there, very similarities, not to say that they're the same, but political and social contexts of the Indigenous Australians have similar experiences with Indigenous North Americans, you know. So I find that quite fascinating, and that still keeps me grounded because there is quite a, I think the percentage of Indigenous people in Australia is the same percentage of Indigenous people in Canada. So I think it's like 4%. So I guess in that way too, I feel grounded. And then also just, going to cultural events when I can in Australia keeps me grounded to like our powwow events as well. So yeah, I hopefully answered your question, Sheila.
Great, thank you. And we have another question from Charlene Vickers. And they say, Miwich, were you thinking of the West Coast Thunderbird in these works? Plus, what is the color significance of red, yellow, color of chattering teeth, LOL?
Mm. Okay, I guess well, in one of the painting, the red and yellow, of course, can be the color, and the black and white are color of the four directions. So those are Indigenous colors, as we know. The chattering teeth is kind of, that was a new approach to, I try to incorporate digital printing into my practice, particularly with painting. So that was kind of an experiment. And I wanted to like emphasize the creatures, that they're little creatures, these majestic beings. They can start as little creatures and of course, grow into adults. And the fact that they can transform into anything, particular human form, I found quite fascinating. So that's where the teeth come into play. And those teeth are actually a mold of my son's teeth. And so the dentist gave me the mold, and I have it at home, and I see it as quite a nice little sculpture. So I took a photograph of it, and yeah, incorporated it into this like new project with the Thunderbirds versus the Underwater Panther. I wasn't really thinking of the Squamish Thunderbird, but as I mentioned previously, those majestic beings are interrelated and they spread throughout all First Nation cultures. So probably the mythology is different, but perhaps very similar. I only know from Anishinaabe cosmology of the Thunderbird and the Underwater Panther, but I'm sure like other nations can relate to, like, I think, I read somewhere, I don't know if it's Squamish, but the lightning comes from the tail of the Thunderbird rather than in Anishinaabe. It comes through the eyes. Yeah, the lightning. Yeah, that's an interesting question, Charlene.
Charlene. And Sheila also says, thank you very much. And you did answer their question.
Okay, good. Sometimes you feel like you're babbling on here.
No, and then we have another question from Kathy Boosby, and they say, thank you, Roland. Can you talk more about the headlights and the Thunderbird images?
Yes, the headlights, that was my my second attempt at portraying the Thunderbirds in an abstract form. When I used to drive to school, I used to cross the Harbor Bridge and, it's stuck in traffic. And so you just end up looking at, the rears of these cars. And, I just found like looking at all the different shapes of the headlights that they actually look like eyes. To me, they look like creatures. And then, the light that they emanate at night, when you turn on your headlights, is kind of has that kind of foggy aspect. And just, when you put them as sculptures, they look like little creatures or little beings. And I thought, wouldn't it be fantastic just to have an installation of all the headlights or rear brake lights? And that could impose an uncanny feeling upon the viewer to get a sense that these are beings, these are little creatures. So we don't know exactly what it is or what they look like, but the fact that these headlights, have electricity attached to them is another, I guess, like metaphor for the Thunderbirds. And Thunderbirds actually, one of the legends talks about them living in a cave. And there's 12 of them. So when I was listening to these legends as a child, I always imagined that what would that cave look like? What would these creatures look like? And so that's why I use the headlights and brake lights. So very expensive, mind you. I had to hire a car electrician to hook them up. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for that. Yeah, it is the things that we don't think about, the electricians and all these other helping hands that come to put these installations together.
Yes.
Thank you, Kathy. I just wanted to propose again, if anybody wants to ask their questions by raising their hands or typing in the chat. These have been very insightful questions.
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, I have to tell you a funny thing about the headlights too. When I was accumulating the headlights, because they're like $700 each, and I'm like, oh my God, I need 12 of them. That's like really expensive. And I went to look at them at the, at a car accessory shop, and I said to the guy, I'm like, oh, is there any cheaper headlights available? And he says, not really. They're all about $700. And then I said, oh, damn, because I need 12. And he says, oh, hey, I have a friend. He's a mechanic. And he just, his shop is up the road. And this is in Australia. And he goes, I reckon if you give him a case of beer, he'll give you a couple headlights. And I'm like, really? And he's like, yeah. So I went over there, and sure enough, it was true. So I got I would bring a case of beer, and this guy would give me a couple of headlights that I could pick. So I thought that was quite good.
Good bargaining.
Bargain for him, not for
Yeah.
me. I think I gave him like 4 cases of beer or something.
Yeah, that's a pretty good bargain. Yeah.
Yeah. It was like, oh my God, how am I going to afford all this? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I see some more questions. We have a question from Mitra, who's asking, how do you make the paintings? They look amazing, so precise. Thank you, Rolande.
Thank you. Thank you for the compliment. I make the paintings. It's a two-way process. I kind of sketch it out first on a piece of paper, my ideas, and then I transfer that sketch like by hand to the canvas. But then I don't actually copy the entire sketch. It's more intuitive after I've laid down the main form, so for example, the octagon, then I'll extend upon it what I see visually and what's happening on the canvas. So it is very labor intensive. It's a lot of scaling up using a ruler, a lot of masking, a lot of painting, repainting, unmasking. But I find that quite enjoyable, especially when I take off the tape, and there's such a nice, clean, sharp edge. To me, that's so beautiful. So that's why I like hard edge abstraction.
Thank you. And they are very precise. I've seen them up close. And if you're around tomorrow from 12 to 2, you can also come see them and get the details and Rolande's meticulous way that she's put them together. So we have another question from Kathy again. And they're asking, also wondered if you could talk about your previous computer work and how and if it impacts your approach to abstraction.
My computer work? Zoom programming?
I believe so.
No, I've left that way behind. I used to work so hard as a computer programmer. I was a junior computer programmer working for Reuters. And, some days I'd work 3 full days And back then, I mean, this was many, many decades ago, I was the only female as well. And all the other programmers were male, and we used to have our meetings in the pub because we do like 48-hour shift when we're running the billing for Reuters. And that's where I learned to drink from these men. But I think, yeah, the programming doesn't really fit into my practice at all. Actually, I've kind of closed that chapter of my life, thankfully. This is much more interesting and fun.
Thank you. And then we have another question from Sheila again, and they're asking, it is interesting that the car called the Thunderbird, that the car is called the Thunderbird. I wonder what the connection between the auto and the indigenous majestic being is.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I guess I know there's like that, wasn't there that movie or that TV series called The Thunderbird as well? You know, people always, you know, tell me about these new things with the Thunderbird. I guess in Anishinaabe mythology, there wouldn't have been any cars back then. I guess when they were telling these legends, but obviously when I was a child, there were cars. Yeah, I don't know if maybe the Thunderbird borrowed that from First Nation culture. You know, I guess it's quite many artists use the Thunderbird, you know, in their works, like Norval Morrissey, Ahu, N.A.J. Kabab, Dwayne Linkletter, like Daphne, Otajig, like huge amount of artists draw upon the Thunderbird from all nations, you know. I'm sure there's probably even a Thunderbird, but it's not called the Thunderbird in, you know, Australian Indigenous people too. But who knows? But that's my favorite majestic being. You know, just the bird-like creature, and you know, I often think of. I mean, I'm petrified of birds after I saw Hitchcock, you know, the Birds movie. But these ones, I just kind of just find them like very inspiring, and they ignite my imagination.
Great, thank you. That actually leads us into our next question from Lisa. And Lisa is asking, can you talk a little more about how abstraction allows you the freedom to tell the stories of these majestic creatures and their cosmology that objective or narrative work doesn't allow?
Yeah, I guess, well, the abstraction, you know, I find it quite interesting because these are from, you know, as I showed in the images from the slideshow, these are from like the, you know, 18th and 19th century, portraying these abstract forms that, you know, the Thunderbird or, you know, the underwater panther, they can transform, and that these symbols are very specific to those majestic creatures. So there is a narrative there, like in Indigenous culture, that, you know, talks about, you know, the rivalry between the two beings. You know, some people will portray them as representational figures, you know, like a bird or like a cat, or, you know, and those ones I'm not really particularly interested in. I'm really into abstraction, and that's always been a trait in my practice. I abstract everything. I think it's because when I went to that school, that Native after school program, I couldn't do any of the regalia nicely. I did it very badly. And I would abstract it when I was a child. And they used to always say, no, Rolande, stick to the plan. You know, so I guess that in itself, I find intriguing. And also I'm always looking for connections between Western contemporary art and Indigenous culture. And so in this particular series of work, that allows me the freedom to straddle both worlds.
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa, for the question. We have another question from Kathy again. Have you shared your work, your revisiting of the Thunderbird and underwater panther with Anishinaabe relatives? If so, what kinds of conversations, connections have come up?
The underwater panther is my newest, like, that's a new thing in my practice, like showing the two majestic beings fighting. So it's brand new. Yeah, I showed it too when my mom was alive, and showed, talked about the lightning and the headlights and the rear brake lights and the wire sculptures that went with them. And yeah, she thought it was interesting. She didn't actually like see it, but could get the understanding that it does draw upon Anishinaabe cosmology. I guess some people, showing those works in Australia, people just would have, like, looking at the installation, would see it as like an uncanny environment, something familiar but not familiar, and get a sense of eeriness. So I guess in that sense, they could, your imagination could extend and you could draw upon what it could be. But it's something that is not real,
Mhm. Yeah, it's speaking to abstraction's ability to enhance world building and have everybody's objective sense. While the story is still there, it's still within the viewer who does kind of the work of forming a narrative, if there is one.
Yeah. I mean, I guess for First Nation people that know those symbols, the narrative is there.
Yes, of
It's always
course.
been there through abstraction. So I guess, like some say, like even like the mythology is abstracted, you know, and I guess just take it to a different level.
Yes, yeah. Exactly, the connections between Indigenous and Western understandings of abstractions and art as a mediator between the
Yeah.
two.
This is the beauty of materials, like, so previously I used like the road tape, but that was more talking about borders and boundaries, but it does have the chevron in there, which is part of the Thunderbird's like symbol. So, but now it's like strictly paint, but still using the, octagon or the hourglass to represent those beings. So people who know Anishinaabes out there, they know those symbols automatically. Oh, that's a thunderbird, Well, that's the underwater panther emerging.
Yeah, exactly. There's always that person coming from this background and having that understanding, but it's still abstraction as that mediating language. We have another question from Kathy. Can you talk a little bit about your PhD work and how it ties into your work now? And was it a fine arts PhD?
Yes, it was yeah, it was my PhD was titled towards an Indigenous history. So it was a visual arts PhD, Doctor of Philosophy. So there I kind of just talked about like the problems involved in looking at Indigenous art that resulted, from way back when it was considered craft, and it, wasn't really considered art. And how in the 90s, the contemporary Indigenous art, emerged, and all these Indigenous collectives started to resurface and, get together and, fight for their aesthetics, that if there are craft processes, it doesn't mean that it's a lower art form. Talked about collage as a form or as a means for resistance, and the whole act of cutting, pasting, regluing, shifting, moving around, also has associations with trying to create one's own histories that have been left out of the Western art domain. So yeah, that's basically the PhD in a nutshell. It's very challenging, but interesting. So it was actually between Australia and Canada. So not the whole world, but just those two nations, because I live in both, like from Canada, live in Australia, and I thought that would be interesting, and also like to tell stories or to tell histories that haven't been revealed, you know, like of course the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, Women X is coming up, so that was mentioned in the doctorate, as well as like assimilation policies and the similarities between the two and the differences, you know, so it wasn't like a comparison, it was more like parallels between the two cultures.
Very interesting. And I know it's difficult to condense so much research into
I know.
2 minutes. Yeah, but that's really an insightful path of research of this compare and contrast of similar but not quite the same histories that have happened of colonialism in Australia and Canada. And Kathy says, thank you so much for your generous answers.
Oh, pleasure.
And I think we have a few more minutes. If there are any other questions, feel free to raise your hands or type away in the chat. But in the meantime, while I do the last call for questions, I'll just let everyone know a couple of reminders that tomorrow Rolande will have open studios in person at Griffin Art Project's residency space. So drop by anytime between 12 and 5 and see the works in person, chat with Rolande, ask her any more questions you may have. And we have another event that's happening on site at the gallery, and that's our curators tour with the curators of our current exhibition, Lisa Baltasara and David McWilliam, and that's a tour of Intersecting Orbits, which features works by Michael Morris and Joan Balzar. And that's tomorrow from 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. And I just want to note that Rolande is our first, the Griffin's first International Indigenous Studio Award winner. So I really do want to thank you for joining us, yes, for the past 2 months and sharing your work, your knowledge, your methods of creation. It's been a joy to come up and see how different things look each time we're up in the residency. So I do want to take the time and thank you. And thank you, Sheila. Sheila also thanks you. It's been fascinating, Rolande, to hear and learn about your work and your philosophy.
Oh, thank you.
So yes, please join us tomorrow. I'll just drop the links to those in the chat for anyone who wants more information.
You could come see them in the real and look at how not precise my lines are.
They were quite precise when I saw them. You've done a better job than I would.
Yeah, it's better and better as you go along. But appreciate all those questions. They were pretty good.
Thank you, everyone, for the very insightful questions.
And it's been a great time being here. You know, 2 months goes by so fast. But it was really nice to just work, just make some paintings, you know, not having to worry about do laundry or clean the house or get distracted from everyday life that we normally do if I was in my own premises back in Oz. So it was really nice just to get up in my jammies and like start painting and having the space as well. So thank you, Griffin. And I'd also like to thank the National Art School has also helped me with this project. So it was great. And be sad to leave, believe it or not.
Yes, we're sad to see you go. But again, everyone, please come by tomorrow between 12 and 5 and hang out. And Charlene says, love the sharp and hard edges. Great to hang out.
Yeah, it was good too. Yeah, we'll see you tomorrow, no doubt.
Yes, great, thank you. And Lisa also says, one last note, Lisa says, thank you so much for your generous presence, Rolande.
Yeah, it's nice. Thank you, Lisa.
Great, thank you. thank you all for joining us on this lovely Saturday afternoon, and hope to see you tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you for your time, everyone. I mean, the weather's not so great. I think it's raining now, but
Yes, I think so too. And just one final note that Intersecting Orbits, our exhibition is open until May 5th, and the Griffin is open Friday, Saturdays, and Sundays from noon to 5.
good.
Thank
Good
you,
news.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, and see you tomorrow.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.